The first week alone was the hardest. My hands kept reaching for the phone, only to hesitate, tremble, and retreat. I wanted to call her, to hear her voice even if just to ask about the weather or how the kids were doing. But I didn't. I had promised myself I wouldn't be the shadow that kept reappearing. I would respect her boundary, even if it tore me apart. Each morning, I made tea for one. I laid out 2 mugs at first, by habit. Her favorite floral cup with the tiny chip on the handle. I stared at it for minutes before putting it back in the cupboard, every time. The silence in my apartment echoed like a punishment I wasn't sure I deserved. Was I really that unbearable? Did my love smother her to the point of calling the police? I didn't want to think sob it, she had screamed. And her eyes had no trace of hesitation. Only fear, anger, maybe even disgust. On the 7th morning, I stood at the kitchen sink watching the wind play with the leaves outside. The autumn colors were beginning to fade. My reflection in the glass looked older than I remembered. Tired. Shrinking. That's when the memories returned in waves. I remembered when she was 12. Her father and I were fighting more often than mostly about money. I would try to keep her distracted with school projects and baking. I used to think I was protecting her from the noise. But now I wonder, was I teaching her to pretend pain didn't exist? That it could be baked away with sugar and vanilla? I remembered her crying at 16, heartbroken over her first boyfriend. She had wanted space, just a quiet room to be sat in. But I pushed in, sat beside her, rubbed her back, whispered words I thought were helpful. She told me to go away. I didn't. I couldn't. I thought if I held on tighter, I could make the pain go away. Maybe I just made it worse. I remembered her wedding day. Her smile was radiant. I had never felt more proud. But even then, I hovered. Checked every detail. Triple-checked the catering. Ironed her veil. Rehearsed the speeches in my head. Her best friend pulled me aside and said, "You should let her breathe, Helen." I laughed it off. Now I wonder if I should have listened. 2 weeks after the incident, I received a letter in the mail. Not a text. Not a voicemail. A real letter. Her handwriting. "Mom, I don't know how to say this out loud, so I'm writing." I didn't mean to scream. I was overwhelmed. Angry. But mostly scared. "You always want to help, and I know you mean well. But sometimes it feels like you don't see me. Like I'm still that little girl in your eyes, not the woman with her own life, her own family, her own way of doing things." I felt like I was drowning, and instead of pulling me up, you were pulling harder. "I'm sorry," I yelled. "I'm sorry I used that word. But I need to breathe. Maybe someday we can talk. But not yet. Claire." I read the letter twice. Then a third time. Each word hit me like a soft blow, gentle, but undeniable. I clutched the page to my chest and cried. Not because she hurt me, but because she trusted me enough to tell the truth. I started doing things differently after that. Each morning I went for a walk around the block. I waved to strangers. I smiled at dogs. I began volunteering at a local community center for the elderly people like me, who felt invisible. We helped each other, played cards, shared stories. Some of them hadn't seen their children in years. One woman named Gloria told me, "Sometimes love looks like absence. Sometimes the kindest thing your kid can do is ask for space, because they trust that you'll still be there when they come back." Her words stuck with me. I stopped bringing up Claire in every conversation. I stopped measuring my worth by how often I saw my grandchildren. I started journaling, writing letters to myself, to my past, to the younger me who had no idea how to let go. One day at the community center, I helped organize a poetry reading. I stood behind a lectern, my voice a little shaky, but clear. "I was once a mother who mistook worry for love," I began. I wrapped my cares so tightly, it became a cage. But cages, even golden ones, are still prisons. Now I learn to open doors. I wait, not to be needed, but to be chosen. When I finished, the room was silent. Then came applause, gentle but warm. I looked out at the sea of weathered faces, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen for who I truly was. Not a mother, not a burden, not a ghost of my former self, but a person still becoming. The phone rang a week later. It was Claire. She didn't apologize. I didn't ask her to. She said, "Would you like to come by for an hour on Saturday? The kids want to see you. I'll be here too." And I said, "Only if it's truly okay." And she said, "It is." I arrived with nothing but a smile and a small pie I baked the night before. I didn't stay long. I didn't ask too many questions. I watched my grandchildren play. I told them stories when they asked. I watched Claire move around her kitchen with grace, confidence and, yes, independence. I didn't try to be part of it. I just witnessed it. When it was time to leave, she walked me to the door. For a moment, we stood in silence. She looked at me, softer this time. "Thanks for coming, Mom." I smiled. "Thanks for inviting me." And that was it. But it was everything. Later that night, I returned home and wrote in my journal. July 15th. She smiled at me today, not out of guilt, not out of pity, but like she saw me just as I am now. Not clinging, not begging, not trying to rewrite the past. Just a mother, learning to love quietly. That night, after visiting Claire and the kids, I sat at my small dining table, the smell of baked apples still lingering on my coat. The quiet no longer felt like punishment, it felt like presence. My own presence. I wasn't waiting by the phone anymore. I wasn't pacing, wondering what I did wrong. I was here, fully in my skin, breathing, accepting. I made myself tea. 1 cup. Just for me. I took it out to the little balcony. The air was crisp, and the stars above blinked with indifference. I liked that. The sky didn't care who I was or how often my daughter called. It just was. I remembered something my husband used to say. "We're just stories, Helen. Little flashes of light. We don't need to burn forever. Just bright enough for someone to remember us kindly." For a long time, I had tried to keep the flame going, forcing warmth into spaces where it wasn't asked for. Now I was learning to be a soft glow. No longer a wildfire. Just enough light to offer if someone needed it. The following weekend, Claire invited me again. This time, I brought an old photo album. I didn't ask to show it. I just left it on the coffee table. Her granddaughter found it first. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing to a grainy photo of me holding Claire on the beach. I smiled. "That's your mom, when she was just about your age." Claire looked up from the kitchen where she was cutting carrots. She paused. For a second, her eyes softened. "I remember that day," she said quietly. We didn't say more, but we didn't need to. It was enough. A few months passed this way, small visits, brief chats, no overstepping. I learned to listen more than I spoke. I learned to ask before giving advice. And I learned that love doesn't always look like interference. It can look like stillness, like a warm silence that says, "I'm here if you need me." One afternoon, Claire called unexpectedly. Her voice was tight. "Mom," she said, "can you come over?" "Of course," I said, already grabbing my coat. When I arrived, she was on the porch, eyes red. I had a fight with Daniel. I didn't want to talk to anyone else. Something inside me froze, part fear, part surprise. She had chosen me, not because I was convenient, not out of obligation, but because she wanted my presence. We sat on the porch swing. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't say, "I told you so." I just let her talk. She cried a little, laughed a little, and when she was quiet, I simply placed my hand on hers. "Thank you," she said, "for not trying to fix it." That night, after she went inside, I sat in the car a long while. My heart was full, not with pride, but with peace. Weeks passed. Fall turned to winter. We started a new tradition: Sunday morning walks in the park with her kids. I didn't push. Sometimes she canceled. Sometimes I couldn't go. But the rhythm began to feel natural. Like maybe, just maybe, we were finding our way back to each other, not through guilt, not through duty, but through choice. I began writing again, small stories, reflections. One day, the local newspaper published a short essay I submitted anonymously. It was called "How to Let Go Without Disappearing." It was about mothers and daughters, but also about time and grief and the quiet dignity of stepping aside without stepping away. When I showed it to Claire, she read it slowly. Then she looked at me and said, "You wrote this, didn't you?" I nodded. She didn't say anything for a long time. But before I left that day, she hugged me longer than she had in years. Around Christmas, I was invited to spend the whole weekend with them. It was the first time I'd slept under their roof since that day. The guest room had been freshly made up. My name was embroidered on a new towel. A handwritten note sat on the pillow. "Welcome home, Mom. Just for the weekend, but still home." I cried when I read it. Quietly, into the towel she had folded just for me. That night, we played board games. Claire laughed more than I'd seen her in years. Her husband and I talked about nothing and everything. The kids climbed into my lap as I read them a Christmas story. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's life. I felt wanted, not needed, but wanted. And there's a difference. One evening, near the end of winter, Claire and I sat alone by the fire. She sipped her tea, eyes lost in the flame. "You know," she said, "I used to feel so trapped by you. I didn't know how to say it without hurting you." "I know," I replied. "And I didn't know how to love without clinging." She looked at me. "But now, I feel like I'm getting to know you again. Not just as my mom, but as a woman." That sentence broke something open in me. Not pain, but healing. Back home later that night, I opened my journal. March 3rd. There's a quiet joy in becoming less central. In watching the people you love find their own rhythm. I used to want to be the melody. Now I'm content being the harmony, soft, steady, always there if the music needs me. The healing wasn't perfect. Some weeks she didn't call. Some visits felt awkward. But it was real. And it was enough. The hardest part wasn't being cast out that day she screamed. The hardest part was realizing that in my quest to be irreplaceable, I had forgotten how to be gentle. Now, I walk beside her. Not in front. Not behind. And some days, she reaches for my hand. That's all I need. I'd always prided myself on doing things alone. Grocery shopping. Walking to appointments. Paying bills. After Claire pushed me away, I vowed never to be a burden again. But time, like gravity, has its own laws. My knees began to ache more with each step. My balance wavered when I got out of bed. And one morning, after bending to tie my shoes, I blacked out for 2 full minutes on the kitchen floor. The silence in those moments was terrifying. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just empty. When I woke up, I stared at the ceiling and whispered aloud. "This is how it starts, isn't it?" I didn't call Claire that day. I told myself it was just dehydration, that I could handle it. But deep down, I knew. Independence isn't a straight line. It's a dance. And sometimes, you have to let someone catch you. 2 weeks later, at our usual Sunday walk, I moved slower than usual. Claire noticed. Her brow furrowed as she watched me carefully ease myself onto a bench. "You okay, Mom?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just a little tired." She didn't push. But she didn't smile either. That night, she called. "You know," she said, "it's okay if you need help. It doesn't mean you've failed." I hesitated. I don't want to be a problem again." "You're not a problem. You're my mother. There's a difference." A week later, I finally told her about the fall. She showed up at my apartment the next morning, unannounced, holding 2 bags of groceries and a small blood pressure monitor. "No lectures," she said. "Just let me be here today." It was the first time she had taken care of me in over 30 years. Watching her move around my kitchen cooking, humming, setting a plate down in front of me felt something shift. Not shame, not guilt, just peace. A kind of full-circle comfort I didn't know I'd been craving. She poured me tea, then sat down. "You know," she said, "for a long time I thought being strong meant doing everything by myself." I looked up. I thought the same. We both laughed softly. Maybe this is what healing looks like, not grand declarations, not tearful apologies, but 2 women sitting across from each other, both finally allowing themselves to be human. As the months passed, the roles between us continued to shift, not with force, but grace. Claire began taking me to my doctor's appointments. I taught her how to cook the stew my mother used to make. She helped me update my will. I helped her sew a costume for her youngest school play. The exchange was quiet, mutual. Sometimes we still slipped. She'd snap. I'd retreat. Old habits flared. But now we had tools. Patience. Apologies. A sense of time as something that didn't need to be rushed anymore. One afternoon in June, she brought out an old box from her attic. "Do you remember this?" she asked, pulling out a stack of cassette tapes. I did. They were my audio journals, recordings I used to make in the early 90s, when her father was sick, and I had no one to talk to. We sat on the floor, knees touching, and played one. Static filled the air, then my younger voice spoke, trembling. "It's 11:34 p.m. Claire's asleep. I don't know how to keep holding this family together." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "I didn't know you were that scared," she whispered. "I didn't want you to," I replied. She nodded. "But I wish I had." We listened to 3 more that night, each one a time capsule of a woman trying to stay afloat. When we finished, Claire turned to me. "You didn't ruin my life, Mom. I promise. You just didn't know how to let go." And for the first time, I believed her. But time waits for no one. Not even the healing. Later that summer, during a routine scan, my doctor called me back in. There was a shadow on my lung. He used words like early stage, biopsy, treatment plan. I heard none of them, just the silence between each word, the weight of it, the space where certainty used to live. When I told Claire, I expected panic. But instead, she just reached out and said, "Okay, we'll face this." We. That word. It changed everything. The weeks that followed were both brutal and beautiful. There were long days at the hospital, tubes and tests, and tired eyes. But there were also shared sandwiches in waiting rooms, crossword puzzles by my bedside, and laughter, so much unexpected laughter. She called me brave. I told her I was just tired. She told me that being tired and showing up was the bravest thing of all. One evening, after a long chemo session, I asked her to bring me to her house. I wanted to sleep in the guest room, the one with the embroidered towel, the one that had once been off limits. She tucked me in that night, like I had done for her 1,000 times. And as she leaned down to kiss my forehead, I whispered, "You've become a better mother than I ever was." She stopped, her breath caught, and then she said, "No, Mom, I've become a better daughter because you never stopped trying." In the weeks that followed, I began writing letters, not just to Claire, but to my grandchildren, to my younger self. One letter began, "Dear Claire, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer standing beside you. But I'm still here. In every story you tell, in the quiet strength you've learned, in the way you listen now, not to fix but to understand. You made me proud, not because you were perfect, but because you became real. Love always." Mom, I didn't die that year. The cancer was caught early. The treatments were hard, but they worked. I lost my hair, but not my sense of humor. I lost some strength, but gained a daughter who now visits not out of duty but joy. One day, we stood in her kitchen just like that day, long ago, when she'd screamed. And I said, "Do you remember what you said to me that afternoon?" Her face tightened. "I've tried to forget." I touched her hand. "Don't." That was the day everything changed. She nodded. "I still regret it." "You don't have to," I said. "You set a boundary, and I learned to respect it. That's what saved us." We both stood there a moment longer, quiet. Then I laughed softly. "You never did call the cops." She grinned. "You never gave me a reason to again." The wind was cooler, the light more golden. My walks became shorter, but more intentional. Every morning, I sat by the window and watched the leaves fall one by one, like little goodbyes whispered by time. Claire visited more now, not every day, but often. Sometimes with the kids, sometimes alone. There was no longer awkwardness, no tension, just space, and warmth, and ease. One afternoon, as she made tea in my kitchen, she asked, "Do you ever think about the end?" I looked at her and smiled gently. "Every day, but I'm not afraid anymore." She nodded slowly, almost tearfully. "I used to be so angry with you," she said. "When I was younger, when you wouldn't let me make my own mistakes. I thought you wanted to control me." "I did," I said simply. "Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't trust life." She looked surprised. "When your father died," I continued, "it was like something ripped through me. I had no control over it. So I tried to control everything else. You, time, holidays, emotions. But grief doesn't obey anyone, and neither should daughters." She came to sit beside me, her hand finding mine. "You tried your best, Mom." "I did," I whispered. "And sometimes, our best still hurts people." A few weeks later, I got the news. The cancer had returned. Quietly, aggressively. This time, they used words like palliative and comfort care. Words meant to soften a blow that still hit like steel. I didn't cry. Not right away. There was a kind of peace in knowing, not the panic of uncertainty, but the stillness of conclusion. Like the final chapter of a book I'd read slowly, painfully, and with all my heart. I told Claire that evening. She didn't speak for a while, just sat beside me, the clock ticking softly in the background. "Okay," she finally said. "What do you want?" "To be home," I said. "To be near you, but not a burden." She squeezed my hand. "You never were. You were just lost in your love for me." In the weeks that followed, Claire prepared her guest room once more. This time not for a holiday or a visit, but for a slow goodbye. I moved in quietly. No drama. No long conversations. Just presence. My old apartment was boxed up. My books came with me. So did my journals. And my favorite mug. The children, now old enough to understand more than they said aloud, treated me with reverence. Like I was already halfway to somewhere else. We shared stories around the fire. I read them the same bedtime tales I used to read Claire. She listened too, sometimes from the doorway, sometimes from the edge of the bed. One evening, Claire and I sat together watching the rain. "You know," she said, "I used to think forgiveness was something you gave when someone asked for it. And now, I think it's something you give when you're ready to stop carrying it." I nodded. "Do you forgive me?" "I already did. Long ago. I just didn't know how to say it." I smiled. "I forgive you too," I said, "for growing up so beautifully that I didn't know how to let go." As the days grew shorter, so did my time. The doctor gave me weeks, maybe a month. Claire took leave from work. She cooked my meals, brushed my hair, sat beside me while I napped. Sometimes I woke to find her crying softly, pretending to scroll through her phone. Sometimes I was the one who cried out how lucky I was to have lived long enough to see this version of her. Not just a daughter, but a woman of strength, and softness, and grace. "I don't want you to die," she said one night, curled beside me like a child. "I know," I whispered, "but I want you to know something." She sat up, wiping her cheeks. "What?" "I died proud of the woman you became. That's more than any mother could ask for." The last letter I wrote was to her children. I tucked it into the pages of a book on my nightstand. It said, "To my beautiful grandchildren, if you're reading this, it means your grandmother is no longer here to tell you bedtime stories, to sneak you cookies, or to remind you to wear socks in winter. But I want you to know this. I loved your mother with a love too big, too wide, sometimes too loud. She taught me how to be quiet, how to be gentle, how to let go and still love fiercely. You are her legacy, and through her, you are mine. Be kind, be soft, but also be wild and brave. The world needs more of that. With all my love, Grandma Helen." I passed in my sleep. On a Wednesday morning, peacefully, Claire was beside me, holding my hand. She said later she didn't even realize I was gone at first. She thought I was dreaming. She said I looked content. The funeral was small, just family, some neighbors, a few women from the community center where I used to volunteer. Claire read a piece of one of my journal entries. She stood in front of the room, voice clear, face wet with tears. "My name is Claire," she began, "and this is what my mother taught me. That sometimes love is loud, and sometimes it's quiet. That sometimes it hurts, and sometimes it heals. But always, it changes you." After everyone left, she stayed by my grave for a long while. She placed a small bouquet beside the headstone. No grand words, just a whisper. "You walked out when I asked you to, but you never left me.